Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating new development coming directly out of the Vatican. We're going to break down a newly released document from the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. This document details the exact, highly structured procedures for how members of the priestly fraternity of St. Pius X, which you'll often hear referred to as the SSPX, can return to full communion with the Catholic Church. If you love understanding how massive, ancient institutions handle complex internal divisions through very specific protocols, you are going to find this absolutely fascinating. We're going to decode this dense canonical decree together.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. 1. A streamlined path home. 2. The protocol for priests. 3. Understanding lay imputability. 4. Returning as lay faithful. And 5. Governance, grace, and unity.
Section 1. A streamlined path home, the post-schism reality.
So, Rome's administrative response to this was honestly incredibly rapid. On July 1st, a schismatic act occurred that led to excommunications. And literally the very next day, July 2nd, boom, the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith published an explanatory note. They moved swiftly to establish direct procedures for reconciliation, and they've already set a clear commencement date for the priest protocols, which is July 1st, 2026. This really shows an institution that is highly prepared and decisive in its administrative rollout.
Now, historically, when dealing with the SSPX and Lefebvrite schisms, the Vatican would create these special, centralized bureaucratic commissions, like the Ecclesia Dei Commission. But this time around, they're intentionally avoiding a repeat of that experience. Instead, Rome is completely streamlining the process. They're bypassing those special commissions entirely in favor of direct, local involvement. So they're empowering diocesan ordinaries, meaning local bishops, and the leaders of fraternities united with Rome to handle these reconciliations directly. It's a massive shift from centralized bureaucracy right down to localized authority.
Section 2. The Protocol for Priests, a strict return. For Lefebvrite priests who are seeking to return to full Catholic communion, the Vatican has outlined a pretty heavy bureaucratic lift. First off, starting in July 2026, the priest has to find an ordinary, like a local bishop or a major superior, who is actually willing to receive him. Second, you can't just fill out a quick web form. He must write a handwritten letter directly to the Pope asking for the remission of the censures incurred by his irregular ordination or his membership in the SSPX. Third, he's got to submit his certificate of priestly ordination, along with some very specific signed doctrinal documents. And finally, he must complete a designated probationary period. It's a highly formalized chain of command. You can kind of think of it as the ultimate high-stakes HR onboarding process, but, governed entirely by canon law.
Because this return is definitely not just about filing paperwork. It requires a formal submission to modern church teachings. To be reconciled, a priest has to formally accept the Second Vatican Council and the legitimacy of the Novus Ordo Missae, which is the modern Mass, even if he still remains attached to the ancient rite. He has to accept Lumen Gentium number 25, which dictates strict adherence to the Church's magisterium, and he must adhere to Pope John Paul II's Code of Canon Law. Finally, he's required to sign two crucial documents, the Professio Fidei, which summarizes the Catholic faith, and the Formula Adhaesionis, where he promises fidelity to the Pope and commits to not attacking him publicly.
Once those documents are sent by that willing ordinary over to the Vatican, the Dicastery draws up a rescript. Now, this authorizes the priest to be received ad experimentum. To demystify that Latin canonical term for a second, it basically translates to a probationary period, which is mandated to last at least 1 year, but no more than 3 years. It's very much like a probationary period at a new job. Rome requires this specific block of time just to verify a priest's commitment and obedience before allowing his official permanent incarnation into the diocese.
Section 3. Understanding lay imputability, the degree of responsibility.
All right, let's pivot to the everyday worshipers sitting in the pews. To understand how the Vatican treats them, we have to look at a canonical concept called imputability. Imputability is essentially the degree of subjective responsibility a person has for a specific action. For someone to be considered highly imputable, they must possess full awareness of what they're doing and give deliberate consent to it. If you think about how degrees of legal liability function in secular law, where intent and awareness completely change the severity of an infraction, well, this is canonical law operating in a very similar, highly structured way.
And the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith is super clear in the document regarding penalties for laypeople attending the SSPX. They explicitly note that imputability cannot be presumed automatically, but must be assessed case by case. This is a vital point to take away from this explainer, for sure. It really highlights the Vatican's highly nuanced and arguably merciful approach here. They're making it known that they don't just apply a blanket excommunication or penalty to every single person. Instead, they look closely at the subjective intent of the individual.
Section 4. Returning as lay faithful. Two distinct paths. By applying this concept of imputability, the Vatican effectively creates two totally different mechanisms for lay people who want to return to full communion. On one side, we have imputable laity. These are folks with proven imputability, people who belong to the Third Order of the SSPX or those who habitually participate and formally share the SSPX's doctrinal positions. On the flip side, we have non-imputable laity. These are lay people who attend SSPX chapels strictly for liturgical or spiritual reasons and who, even if they know there's tension with the Holy See, do not reject the magisterium or the authority of the Pope. So, as you can see, formal membership and ideological alignment change everything about an individual's canonical status. So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, the crucial difference comes down to the required action. For the imputable laity, the formal adherence, the process requires a formal act of adherence. They have to present to their local bishop the exact same signed documents the priest signed, the professio fide and the formula adhessionis. It's a strict, paper-driven process with the local ordinary. But for the non-imputable laity, the everyday attendees, the Vatican offers a deeply pastoral, incredibly simple path. It's totally sufficient for them to simply approach any Catholic priest in full communion with the basic decision to not attend the SSPX in the future. The level of bureaucracy directly scales with the level of ideological responsibility. Section 5. Governance, grace, and unity. The bigger picture. Okay, now that we've mapped out the specific rules of canon law for both the clergy and the laity, we really need to ask, why does this matter to us? Well, it shows us exactly how a 2,000-year-old institution operates in real-time crisis management. The Vatican is using its structured bureaucracy not just as a tool to exclude or punish, but to cleanly orchestrate reconciliation. By clearly defining terms like imputability and by setting up specific document trails and probationary periods, they're providing very clear, navigable mechanisms for grace and return. The whole goal of this meticulous legal framework is to maintain the integrity of the institution, all while offering a direct pathway back to ultimate unity. To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought based on everything we've covered today. The Vatican has clearly laid out a masterclass in bureaucratic reconciliation, but it really begs the question, can administrative protocols and signed formulas truly heal deep ideological divides over time? It is a fascinating dynamic between law, ideology, and human nature. Thank you so much for joining me today as we explored the structured pathways of Vatican canon law. Keep seeking, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.